As we gather to consider God's word, let us open our hearts, our minds, our lives to God's truth. Please be seated. Last Wednesday, with Ash Wednesday, we began the season of Lent, a holy season for Christians as we prepare for Holy Week and Easter. It has many traditions in it. And as I noted in my sermon for Ash Wednesday, while some of our traditions are helpful, others can be limiting, if not destructive. Our gospel this morning is a good guide to help us understand how during this time we can choose healthy challenges to help us grow in faith. As the 40-day season of Lent begins, Luke's account of Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness gives us an example of resourcefulness amidst struggle. And what it has to offer might not be what you expect. The word Lent comes from an Old English word for lengthen and refers to the lengthening of daylight as the year moves from winter to spring. However, it was over centuries that the season of Lent actually evolved into what we think of now, this 40-day period of preparation. Having said that, though, throughout Scripture, that number 40 probably seems familiar to many of you. It's been important, and it resonates with many of the foundational stories of our faith forebearers. The 40 days of rain, of the Great Flood, Moses' 40 days without food on Mount Sinai, Elijah's 40 days without food on his journey to Mount Horeb, and of course, Israel's 40 years in the wilderness before finding their promised land. And then, of course, today we have Jesus' 40 days of wilderness temptation. On the human level, in each we see a story of struggle in which there is stress and risk, followed by trust in God and then growth in faith. On the divine level, we see a parallel track in which God becomes a partner with the sufferer, creating, resolving, and redirecting along the way. The season of Lent is in the same vein. As we begin our own 40-day journey, we can choose prayer or study, disciplines or fasting, etc. And in doing so, and taking even those small risks, we also have an opportunity to invite God to walk with us as a partner. Risking the unexpected along the way, we may also in turn welcome the possibility of change and growth in faith. Now, if this seems too abstract, here's a familiar example. During their 40 days in the wilderness, the Hebrews were looking toward that promised land, right? And yet there were many setbacks along the way, including hunger. In response to their need for food, God then fed them daily with manna. True to form, though, they complained this wasn't good enough, to which Moses responded, God fed you daily with manna in order to make you understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. In other words, if the Hebrews had been miraculously zapped from Egypt to the promised land in a moment, they wouldn't have appreciated the great gift that it was. And if they had been miraculously fed a different meal every day for those 40 years, as delightful as that sounds, they wouldn't have appreciated all the ways in which God's law and grace nurtured them daily, the least of which was food. So what about the gospel and what it offers us in our 21st century Lent? Well, as his reflection on this passage, notes, Matthew Bolton says, one interpretation of Jesus' temptations is to sort of cast him as a sort of spiritual superhero, resisting enticements at every turn. As such, he exhibits a strength and courage that we should all try to emulate. Well, that's fine. However, remember, Jesus began this encounter right after his baptism. it says, as one filled with and then led by the Spirit. So just as the Hebrews in the desert before him, now Jesus comes to understand that one does not live by bread alone, but also from a deeper source of strength that is always with him. It's one of the most important of faith's lessons that we often have to learn over and over again, and that is that in our joy, suffering, or temptation, God is with us, for we are God's beloved children. And so Jesus' responses to the devil aren't just out of some Messiah-like strength, although that probably helped. They aren't out of some earthly strength to resist that temptation, but also out of a developing knowledge and trust in God's love and care. Whether it is a literal manna from heaven, or this kind of humility and confidence, God is always at hand. And Lent is our time to simplify, and in a number of ways, so that we too can tap into and experience God as that resource. This year we are offering a new Lenten practice for the community that taps into this very kind of trust, and that is the Lenten cross. It's been a custom here for decades to bring the cross out every year at Easter and to fill it with flowers in celebration of Christ's resurrection and that gift of new life. A few years ago, we began using that same cross at All Saints also, filling it with photos of those we've loved and lost, and that we remember especially at the Feast of All Saints. And now this year, we thought it would be meaningful to use that cross again as a vehicle for our prayers during this season of Lent, sort of like the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. Now, as an aside, how many of you have heard of the Wailing Wall? Quite a few. Good. Also known as the Western Wall, it's the most sacred place in Judaism, and is also considered a holy site by Muslims and Christians. Dating back to the Second Temple period, from about 500 BCE to just a few decades after Jesus' lifetime, it marks the time of the Hebrews' return from exile and the rebuilding of their temple. That is, until the Romans destroyed it again, except for this section, the western section. In our modern day, people of many faiths are still drawn to this sacred site, leaving their rolled up and folded prayers scrunched into crevices between the stones. In a moment, you'll have an opportunity to write down a prayer on the half-size sheet of paper that's in your bulletin, leaving it in the cross for only God to see. And then, in a few weeks, we will offer them all one final time up to God by burning them in the holy fire at the Easter Vigil. And so let's take a moment of silence, and you can close your eyes if you'd like. And consider this. Consider what is the heaviest thing on your heart. What is bringing you the greatest joy? What is your greatest temptation? And then take a breath and remember that as God's beloved, God is with you with that burden, that joy, that struggle, and walks with you in your grief, in your celebration, and your toil. Now,